Chapter 1, The Serpent's World. The abyssal star cut through the quiet emptiness of space, its engines a hum that carried through the hollow corridors of the ship. The crew had been on the mission for over 6 months, exploring uncharted systems and scanning planets with no significant results. But when the signal had come through, faint, ancient, and undisturbed, the excitement was palpable. Captain Elias Quinn stood at the bridge, staring out at the planet below, its surface a swirl of glowing greens and deep blues. It was as if the world was alive, pulsing with energy. He'd seen hundreds of planets, but there was something unnerving about this one. It didn't look like anything they had encountered in their research. No cities, no sign of civilization. Just endless jungles and what appeared to be an atmosphere full of fog. "We're in orbit, Captain," Lieutenant Karavolkov's voice broke his reverie. She stood next to the navigation console, her eyes on the planet's surface, tracking their descent. "Understood," Elias replied, his voice calm but filled with an edge of curiosity. "Prepare for landing. Scan the surface again. I want to know everything about the terrain before we set foot down there." Volkov nodded, her fingers moving quickly across the console. "Scanning. The electromagnetic fields are off the charts. Something's blocking our sensors. I can barely get a read on the surface beyond basic terrain data." Elias frowned. "Anything unusual?" "Not sure yet. There's some kind of massive energy source deep within the jungles. It's unlike anything we've seen before. Looks natural but structured. Could be a tomb, a monument, or something older. Could be our answer," Elias muttered. "We'll go in, make a first pass, and report back. I don't like the sound of older, though. Let's stay sharp." The rest of the crew, 6 in total, milled about in preparation. They were an experienced team of explorers, each with their own specialized skills. Dr. Isla Vance, the planetologist, adjusted her scanning equipment with an eager smile, while Chief Engineer Samuel Torres double-checked the landing gear and the environmental suits. After a smooth descent, the abyssal star settled on a wide clearing in the heart of the jungle. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of moist earth and something sweetly pungent that couldn't quite be identified. The crew disembarked in silence, their boots sinking slightly into the soft, spongy ground. Above them, the sky was a dull green, and a faint, unearthly light seemed to filter through the dense canopy, illuminating the path ahead. "Stay close. Move in pairs," Elias instructed, his voice steady but with a trace of tension. "We don't know what's down here. And I'm not taking any chances." They moved through the undergrowth, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick layers of moss. The jungle was alive with strange noises, whispers of creatures moving just out of sight, the rustling of leaves, and the faint hum of an unseen current in the air. But there was something else too. A subtle vibration that seemed to pulse through the ground, in time with the steady beat of the crew's hearts. "It's like the whole planet is humming," Torres remarked, his voice hushed as he scanned the terrain. "You feel it too?" "Yeah," Elias said, glancing around. "It's strange. Keep your eyes peeled. We're getting closer to the source of that energy." They pressed on, pushing through the thick foliage until they reached a clearing that opened up to an ancient stone structure, more like a temple than anything natural. The massive, weathered stones were covered in vines and moss, but they were clearly crafted with precision. The air was heavy here, charged as if the very space was alive with energy. Dr. Vance knelt to examine the markings on the stone. "This isn't just a ruin," she said, her voice a mix of awe and caution. "These symbols, they're not from any known civilization. They're older. And there's a pattern, a kind of mathematical precision to them." The others gathered around, their lights scanning the markings. But Elias felt a pull, something intangible but undeniable. A presence. A warmth in the air, a shift in the energy surrounding them. And then they saw it. From the shadows, emerging slowly, like a creature from the deepest depths of the ocean, a form began to take shape. At first, it was a glimmer, a faint outline against the jungle's dim light. Then it solidified, a massive serpent, its sleek, glistening body coiling around the temple's base. It was unlike any snake Elias had ever seen. Its scales shimmered with iridescent colors that shifted with the light, reflecting the very atmosphere around them. The serpent was easily twice the size of the abyssal star, and its eyes, huge, glowing orbs, were locked on them, unblinking. It was enormous, almost too large to comprehend, and yet, somehow, it felt like it had always been there. Dr. Vance gasped, stepping back. "This is impossible. It's not just an animal." Elias didn't move. He couldn't. The serpent's gaze held him as if it were assessing him, weighing him. He felt an ancient intelligence behind those eyes, something far older and deeper than he could possibly fathom. Is it alive? Kara whispered, her voice barely audible. It's not just alive, Elias said, his throat dry. I think it's aware. Very aware. The serpent's massive head tilted slightly, almost as if acknowledging their presence, before it slowly slithered forward, its movements graceful and deliberate. The ground vibrated with each movement, and for a brief moment, Elias felt the overwhelming sensation that they weren't alone, that this creature had been watching them long before they had ever set foot on the planet. And then the serpent spoke. Its voice was not like anything they had ever heard. There was no sound, no vibration in the air. Instead, it was a sensation that crawled into their minds, a whisper that bypassed their ears entirely. You are here. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. And as Elias stood frozen in place, his heart racing, he realized that whatever was about to happen, it had already begun. Are you the one they spoke of? Dr. Vance asked, her voice trembling as she stepped forward, though caution kept her from getting too close. I am the last. The voice rippled through their minds, soothing but with an undertone of deep sorrow. The last of many. The keeper of memories. The serpent who remembers. Elias' heart pounded in his chest as he glanced around at his crew, their expressions a mix of awe and confusion. And then the serpent's glowing eyes locked on him once more. Why have you come? The voice echoed in his mind, a question that carried the weight of 1,000 years. Elias took a step forward, and as he did, he felt the ground beneath him hum with energy, as though the entire planet was holding its breath. We came to understand, he said, his voice quiet but firm. We need your help. We need to know what happened here. The serpent's eyes flickered, and the air grew heavy with the unspoken knowledge it carried. Not all knowledge is meant to be known. And with that, the jungle fell silent, as though the very planet itself was waiting for what would come next. Chapter 2, The Keeper's Riddle. The serpent's presence was overwhelming. Its colossal form stretched out before them, coiling lazily around the stone temple, its glowing eyes never leaving the crew. The strange, unspoken sensation of its voice, its thoughts, lingered in Elias's mind, like an echo that refused to fade. His pulse quickened, but he stood his ground. The crew, too, seemed rooted in place, unsure of how to respond to a creature so ancient, so incomprehensible. Not all knowledge is meant to be known, the serpent had whispered. The words resonated deeply, their weight settling in the pit of his stomach. He wasn't sure what he had expected, but this wasn't it. What do you mean? Elias asked, his voice steady despite the unease creeping up his spine. We came here seeking answers. There's a signal, a presence, something ancient. Can you help us understand it? The serpent's eyes flickered, its massive head tilting ever so slightly to the side. There was something strangely amused in the way it observed them, as if it found their questions both trivial and profound. Answers come at a price, it replied, its voice again reverberating inside their minds, its tone both gentle and foreboding. The signal you seek is not the answer you expect. It is the memory of a time long past, of a civilization that no longer exists. It is their mistake, their burden, not yours. Dr. Vance stepped forward, her eyes wide with wonder. She seemed almost entranced by the serpent, drawn to it in a way that Elias couldn't quite understand. But this civilization, it could hold the key to our survival. We could learn from their mistakes. Not all knowledge is meant to be known, the serpent repeated, its voice cutting through her words like a blade. Their history is not for you to repeat. The price for unlocking that door is a steep one, and there are things that cannot be undone. Elias felt a knot tighten in his chest. He had anticipated the unknown, the mysteries of a lost world, but this felt different. The serpent wasn't just guarding the past, it was warning them. Whatever lay beyond the veil of that forgotten history was dangerous. He could feel it in the air, in the way the ground hummed beneath their feet. Then why show us this? Elias asked. Why reveal yourself to us now, after all this time? The serpent's eyes softened, and for the first time, Elias noticed something he hadn't before, a sorrowful depth as though it carried the weight of millennia. It seemed to hesitate for a moment, the stillness stretching in the air like a fragile thread. I am the last, the serpent whispered, and Elias swore he could hear the pain in its voice. The last of my kind. The last to remember. And I have watched as the stars burned, as the civilizations fell. I have seen the rise and the fall of countless empires, and yet none have learned. None have listened. Listened to what? Kara's voice was barely a whisper, her hand hovering over the holoscanner as though unsure of how to proceed. What is it you want from us? The serpent's gaze shifted toward her, its eyes narrowing ever so slightly. What I seek is not for you to understand. But you are here and you must make a choice. The memory I carry is vast, and it can either save you or doom you. Elias exchanged a glance with his crew. The weight of the serpent's words was heavy, and he could feel the tension in the air like a crackling storm. The jungle was silent, the usual hum of life suspended in the presence of the creature. We're not here to repeat mistakes, Elias said firmly, though his mind was racing. We just want to know the truth. If you can show us, we'll listen. We promise. For a long moment, the serpent remained still, its glowing eyes piercing them all. Then, with a sudden shift in its movements, it uncoiled slightly, and a strange wind swept through the clearing, stirring the leaves and causing the air to shimmer. Very well, the serpent said, its voice resonating with a newfound strength. You will learn. But know this, there are consequences. You will see what was, and you will understand what it cost. And when you leave this place you will be different, whether you are ready for that change or not. The ground trembled and a low hum filled the air. The serpent's tail slowly wrapped around the temple, and the stone structure began to vibrate, sending a pulse of energy through the ground. Elias felt the shift, a thrum beneath his feet, like the planet itself was awakening. And then, without warning, the temple before them began to glow. It wasn't light from any source they could see. It seemed to come from within the very stone itself, as though the structure were alive. Symbols and patterns etched into the rock began to illuminate, their meanings shifting and rearranging as if they were speaking to the crew in a language older than time itself. Dr. Vance gasped, stepping closer to the glowing stone. It's some kind of archive, she whispered. A data bank, or a memory storage device. It's all here. The serpent's voice rippled through their minds again. This is not a simple archive. These are the memories of a people, of an empire, that reached too far. They thought themselves immortal, but immortality comes at a cost. And now, only I remain to remember. Elias felt a chill run down his spine. There was something unsettling in the way the serpent spoke. The memory it held wasn't just about a lost civilization. It was about a warning, a cautionary tale that had been hidden away for eons. The symbols on the stones shifted once more, and Elias could feel a pull, something drawing him closer. The glowing patterns seemed to beckon him, promising answers. His fingers twitched, the desire to understand overwhelming him. We're not afraid of the cost, he said, his voice steady despite the gnawing unease in his gut. Show us. Let us learn. The serpent's eyes flickered, and for a moment, the jungle seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a deep, resonant rumble, the serpent spoke one final time. Very well. But know this, the knowledge you seek comes not from the past but from the future. What you choose to learn today will shape the world that is to come. The ground beneath them began to shake more violently now, and the stone structure's glow intensified as if it were coming to life. The air was thick with energy, and Elias could feel the weight of the serpent's words settling over him like a dark cloud. Before he could react, the ground beneath him cracked open with a deafening roar, and a blinding light erupted from the temple's core. And as Elias's vision was consumed by the light, he heard the serpent's voice one last time, its tone both a warning and a prophecy. You have chosen, Captain. The door is open. But once you walk through it, there is no turning back. And then everything went dark. Chapter 3, The Price of Knowledge. The light engulfed Elias, and for a moment there was nothing. No sound, no sensation, just a vast, empty void where time itself seemed to freeze. He felt weightless, suspended in some strange limbo between reality and oblivion. His eyes were open, yet he couldn't see, couldn't feel anything beyond the overwhelming brightness that consumed everything around him. But then, slowly, the light began to fade, and the sensation of being tethered to the world returned. Elias blinked, trying to adjust to his surroundings. His head throbbed, as though the very act of seeing had shaken loose something deep inside him. He stood alone, surrounded by an immense darkness. The jungle was gone, the temple was gone, the serpent, gone. In its place was an expanse, vast and empty, stretching out in every direction. The air felt thick, dense, as if it were pressing against him. He couldn't breathe easily. It wasn't suffocating, but it was oppressive. And then a voice. Welcome, Elias Quinn. It wasn't the serpent's voice this time, though it carried the same resonance. This voice was deeper, colder, as though it came from the very depths of space itself. The words lingered in his mind, echoing with an unnatural clarity. He glanced around, but there was nothing to see. No shape, no figure. Just endless, inky darkness with no sign of the others. He called out. Where are they? Where's my crew? They are not here. The voice replied, its tone distant but firm. This is not their path. It is yours alone. Elias clenched his fists. Panic crept in, clawing at his chest. I don't understand. What is this place? What's happening? You have crossed the threshold. You have chosen to seek knowledge, and now you will witness what cannot be unseen. The voice was calm, detached, like an ancient force observing a fleeting moment. What you learn here will change everything. But it comes at a cost. Elias shook his head, trying to dispel the creeping dread. The serpent said this would happen. But I wasn't prepared for this. I didn't think it would be like this. No one ever is, the voice responded. The past is a dangerous thing to seek, but you were willing to pay the price. Now you will see what you have asked for. Suddenly the darkness around him began to shift. The ground beneath his feet vibrated again, a low, almost imperceptible hum that made his bones ache. And then, without warning, the void fractured as if some invisible curtain had been pulled back. Before him, a vision began to take shape. It was a city. A sprawling metropolis, vast and impossibly advanced, stretching out as far as the eye could see. Towering structures that reached for the sky, made of materials Elias couldn't even begin to comprehend. Streets lit by glowing orbs, flying vehicles zipping between the buildings. The city thrummed with life, a pulsating energy that filled the air. For a brief moment, Elias thought he had been transported back to the jungle, but the sights before him were far beyond anything he had ever seen. This was no primitive world, it was a civilization at the height of its power. He felt the pull of the vision as though it were dragging him in, forcing him to witness the splendor of this place. He couldn't look away. But then something shifted in the air. A subtle change like a ripple in water. The scene began to distort. Buildings cracked and crumbled, their once pristine surfaces splitting apart. The streets became chaotic, people running, screaming. The sky above darkened, an unnatural storm swirling into existence. Shadows seemed to tear at the edges of the city, pulling it apart piece by piece. Elias felt his stomach drop, his heart pounding as the city around him fell into ruin. This is the past, the voice spoke again, but this time, it had an edge of sorrow, of regret. This is what happens when a civilization reaches too far. They believed themselves invincible, that their knowledge would save them. But in their greed they lost everything. Elias stepped forward, his breath shallow. This is the civilization the serpent spoke of? Yes, the voice whispered. The empire that once ruled the stars. The price of their arrogance was their undoing. And now you see what remains. The vision grew more chaotic. A massive explosion tore through the heart of the city, sending shockwaves that shattered the remaining structures. People fell, their bodies writhing in the violent aftershocks. The ground split open, swallowing entire districts, and the sky, once bright with artificial lights, was now consumed by dark clouds and firestorms. Elias staggered back, his mind reeling. He felt sick, his stomach churning with horror as the image of the dying city etched itself into his memory. He wanted to look away, but the vision held him in place, trapping him in this nightmare. They thought their technology would save them, the voice continued, softer now, almost mournful. They believed that by controlling the flow of time itself, by harnessing the very fabric of existence, they could overcome death. But they failed to understand one truth: there are forces beyond their reach, forces that cannot be controlled. Elias's throat went dry. They tried to manipulate time? Control existence? Yes. The voice's response was chilling. And in doing so, they tore a hole in the fabric of the universe. A rift that could never be mended. And it was their undoing. The vision before him shifted once more, this time to something more personal, more intimate. He saw a figure, one of the rulers of the empire, standing at the heart of a grand chamber, surrounded by glowing consoles. The ruler was dressed in regal attire, their face hidden by a mask of gold. Their eyes, however, were visible, and in them, Elias saw something he hadn't expected: fear. Deep, overwhelming fear. The ruler spoke to a gathering of figures, their voices low and hurried. We've done it. We've opened the doorway. We've unlocked the secrets of eternity. But there was panic in their tone. We need more time. We need more power. And that was the moment they sealed their fate, the voice intoned, the sadness in its words growing stronger. When they reached beyond the limits of their understanding. When they opened the rift that would consume them all. The vision shifted again, this time showing the same ruler standing alone in the chamber, the once glowing consoles now dim and shattered. The city in the background was already crumbling, and the sky outside had turned an unnatural shade of purple, swirling with dark energy. Elias could feel the ruler's desperation, their attempt to reverse the damage, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. And so they perished, the voice whispered, and their knowledge became a curse. The rift they opened has never closed, and the consequences of their hubris have lingered across the galaxy, unseen but ever present. That is the price they paid. The vision began to fade, the images growing dimmer as the space around Elias twisted and warped once more. He felt his legs give way, his body trembling with the weight of what he had just witnessed. The knowledge of a fallen civilization, their mistakes burned into his mind. Now you understand, the voice said softly. The truth has been revealed to you. But remember, knowledge is never without consequence. The rift they opened still exists. And it calls to you, Elias Quinn. Elias collapsed to his knees, his breath ragged as the darkness rushed in again, enveloping him. And just before the void consumed him entirely, the voice whispered once more. What will you do with this knowledge, Captain? Will you make the same mistake? And then everything went black. Chapter 4. The Decision. Elias gasped for breath, his body jerked upright as if he were drowning. He wasn't sure how long he had been in the darkness, but now there was something different. The air felt cooler, thinner, and there was a subtle hum beneath his feet, like the pulse of a heart. He could feel the weight of the vision still heavy in his chest, its truth searing through him, making it hard to think clearly. He opened his eyes, blinking against the unfamiliar light. This time he wasn't alone. He was back in the jungle. The temple loomed before him, its stone face still as imposing as before, yet there was a difference. The air felt charged now, like the calm before a storm. His crew stood a few feet away, staring at him with wide eyes, confusion and concern written on their faces. Dr. Vance was closest, her brow furrowed. Elias, she asked, her voice tinged with unease. Where did you go? What happened? He swallowed, feeling the weight of the knowledge pressing down on him. I saw it. The city. The empire that fell. Kara, who was standing beside the holoscanner, gave him a sharp look. What are you talking about? We never left. You just went still like you were frozen. You didn't respond to us? Her voice dropped to a whisper. We thought we lost you. I was in the vision, Elias murmured, still trying to make sense of it all. The serpent, it showed me what happened to them. The cost of their knowledge. It's beyond anything we imagined. Dr. Vance stepped closer, her expression softened with concern. What did you see, Captain? What did the serpent show you? He hesitated. The images were still so vivid, burning in his mind. He could still feel the city's pulse, its collapse, the sense of doom that had pervaded everything. They tried to manipulate time itself. The rift they opened, it tore their civilization apart. The consequences of their arrogance are still felt across the galaxy. Dr. Vance's eyes widened. Time manipulation? A rift? She shook her head as though trying to process the magnitude of what he was saying. That's not just some ancient myth. That's something real. Something dangerous. Elias clenched his fists, trying to fight the flood of dread that threatened to overwhelm him. And it's still out there. The rift. The forces they unleashed haven't been contained. It's still out there waiting for someone to make the same mistake. He looked around at his crew, each of them silent, waiting for him to speak. They had all come here seeking answers, but now Elias felt the weight of the burden more than ever. The knowledge they sought had come with a price, and the path ahead wasn't just unknown, it was dangerous. What do we do now? Kara asked, her voice laced with fear. We came here for answers. But now we know what happened to them. We can't just ignore it. Elias nodded slowly, the weight of their situation settling like a stone in his gut. We don't have much choice. We can't ignore it, not anymore. The rift, the consequences of what they did, it's not something we can just walk away from. It's still out there and it's calling to us. The air around them seemed to hum in response, a faint vibration that grew stronger with each passing second. Elias's senses were heightened now, like the universe itself was aware of their presence. We need to know more, Dr. Vance said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. We need to understand what they were trying to do and why it failed so catastrophically. If we can find the source, the rift itself, we might be able to stop it. Elias's heart skipped a beat. It was exactly what he had feared. They could try to stop it, yes, but they could also be drawn into the same destructive cycle that had consumed the empire. The temptation to learn more, to understand more, was powerful. But so was the warning. The serpent's words echoed in his mind. Knowledge is never without consequence. We have to be careful, Elias said, his voice low but resolute. The serpent warned us. There are things beyond our understanding, things we cannot control. I don't know if we can stop the rift, but I do know that we can't risk opening it further. We don't even know where to begin, Kara said, crossing her arms. We don't have any way to track this rift. We barely understand what it even is. Dr. Vance spoke up, her voice sharp with determination. But we have to try. If we do nothing, it could grow stronger, uncontrolled, until it's too late. We have to stop the damage before it spreads beyond this planet. We have to try. Elias could see the fire in her eyes. He had always respected her intellect, her drive to find answers. But now, that drive felt dangerous. They weren't just exploring the unknown anymore. They were standing on the edge of a precipice, and one wrong move could send them plummeting into the abyss. But what was the alternative? All right, Elias said, his voice firm. We'll find the source of the rift. But we need to be careful. If we get too close, we might make things worse. And we need to stay together. No one goes off alone. Dr. Vance nodded, and Kara gave him a tight smile. But Elias couldn't shake the feeling that their journey had just begun, and the cost would be far greater than any of them could have imagined. As they turned to leave the clearing, the serpent's words echoed in Elias's mind once more. The knowledge you seek comes not from the past, but from the future. What you choose to learn today will shape the world that is to come. He didn't know what that meant. But he felt the weight of it, pressing down on him as they stepped into the unknown. The jungle seemed darker now, the air heavier. And somewhere in the distance there was a low hum, the same vibration he had felt before. The rift was waiting. Chapter 5, The Rift Calls. The jungle around them felt alive, but not in the way it had before. The trees seemed to grow taller, their limbs twisting in unnatural ways, and the air was thick with an energy that made the hairs on the back of Elias's neck stand on end. It wasn't just the remnants of a lost civilization. It was something more, something ancient, and it felt as if the land itself was watching them, waiting. The crew moved silently, their steps muffled by the dense undergrowth. Elias led the way, his mind racing with the implications of everything they had learned. The serpent's warning, the rift, the destruction it had caused, it was all connected. Whatever had happened to the Empire, whatever they had unleashed, still lingered in the fabric of this world, and the rift, the source of their ruin, could be just as dangerous if they didn't find a way to contain it. We need to get to the coordinates, Dr. Vance said, breaking the heavy silence. She was scanning the data on her holoscanner, her brow furrowed with concentration. The signal we traced earlier, the one from the serpent. It's coming from this direction. The epicenter of all of this is nearby. Elias nodded, keeping his focus on the path ahead. How far? Not far, she replied, glancing up briefly. If the readings are correct, we're within a few kilometers. Kara, walking a few paces behind, turned to Elias with a sharp look. And what happens when we reach it? What's waiting for us? Elias's stomach tightened at the question. He had no answers, not real ones. The serpent had warned them, but the truth remained elusive. All he knew was that they had to find the rift. But whether they could stop it or even understand it was another matter entirely. I don't know, he admitted. But we'll have to figure it out when we get there. The air grew thicker as they continued, the oppressive energy surrounding them intensifying with each step. The jungle seemed to pulse, as if the land itself was resonating with something unseen, something buried deep beneath the surface. Elias stopped suddenly, raising a hand to signal for the crew to halt. The hum. It was faint at first, barely perceptible, but as he strained his senses, he could feel it deep in his chest, a vibration that seemed to come from the very ground beneath him. It was the same hum he had felt earlier, when the temple had begun to glow, when the serpent had spoken. It's close, he said quietly, his voice tight. Dr. Vance adjusted her scanner, her face pale. The signal's fluctuating. It's unstable. Whatever's down there, it's reacting to us. Elias's pulse quickened. We're getting closer. Stay alert. The jungle seemed to open up ahead of them, the thick foliage thinning as they neared a clearing. The energy in the air grew more intense, thick with an almost tangible force. The ground beneath their feet vibrated more strongly now, and Elias could feel the weight of something ancient pressing down on them. It wasn't just the past haunting them, it was something far more immediate. As they reached the edge of the clearing, the source of the signal became clear. At the center of the clearing stood a structure unlike anything they had seen before. It wasn't the temple they had discovered earlier. This was something different, more alien, more advanced. A massive stone ring stood before them, its surface covered in symbols that pulsed with a faint, eerie light. The air around it shimmered, distorting as though the very fabric of reality was bending. Elias felt his breath catch in his throat. This was it. The rift. the source of everything. It was like staring at a wound in the fabric of space-time itself. The stone ring seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly hum, and Elias could feel the pull of it. The gravity of its presence was overwhelming. It wasn't just an object, it was a gateway. A tear in the universe. Dr. Vance stepped forward, her voice a whisper. This is it. The rift. The heart of the Empire's fall. Elias's eyes were fixed on the pulsing structure, but his mind raced. How do we close it? How do we stop it? Kara stepped up beside him, her expression conflicted. Can we close it? If it's like the serpent said, a force beyond our understanding, can we even contain it? Or are we just making the same mistake they did, thinking we can control something we're not meant to? Elias turned to her, his voice steady despite the weight of the question. We have to try. If we don't, the consequences will be even worse. The hum grew louder, the air growing heavier with each passing second. Elias could feel the pulse of the rift calling to him, drawing him in, like it wanted to pull him through the fabric of reality itself. He resisted the pull, forcing his thoughts back to their mission. We need to approach carefully, he said. We don't know what kind of effects being too close to it will have. Dr. Vance, any ideas on how to neutralize it? Dr. Vance was staring at the symbols on the ring, her eyes darting across the glowing patterns. I don't know. These symbols, they're unlike anything I've ever seen. But they seem familiar. Almost like a language I've encountered in ancient data from the Empire's time. If we can translate them, we might be able to understand how it works, how to shut it down. Elias took a deep breath, his mind racing with the possibilities. Every instinct told him they needed to tread lightly, but the desire for answers, the need to stop the rift from consuming everything, pushed him forward. We don't have much time, he said. If this rift was responsible for the collapse of the Empire, we need to act before it spreads. We start translating, figure out how it works. We can't risk it opening further. The crew nodded in agreement, but Elias could see the fear in their eyes. They were standing on the edge of something far greater than any of them had anticipated. The serpent's warnings echoed in his mind, but the pull of curiosity, the drive to stop the destruction, overpowered his doubts. Dr. Vance began to work, pulling up data on her holoscanner and aligning it with the symbols on the rift. The air crackled with energy, and Elias could feel the pressure building, the hum of the rift growing louder and louder. Suddenly, a loud crack split the air, a shockwave of energy radiating from the ring. The ground beneath them trembled violently, and the jungle around them seemed to convulse. Elias staggered back, barely able to keep his balance. What the hell was that? Kara shouted, her voice filled with panic. The rift pulsed again, more violently this time. Elias could feel it in his chest, the thrum of something opening, something ancient and unstoppable. And then, in the blink of an eye, the air around them distorted completely, warping and twisting into shapes that defied logic. Reality itself seemed to tear at the edges. And from the rift, something emerged. A figure, dark, shadowed, impossibly tall, stepped through the breach, its form indistinct but its presence overwhelming. A silhouette, seemingly made of the same energy that was pouring from the rift. It was humanoid in shape, but its features were too distorted, too alien to recognize. Elias's breath caught in his throat. This was no mere artifact of the past. This was something alive. And it had crossed into their world. Run? Kara screamed. But it was already too late. The rift was open. And it was no longer just a doorway to the past, it was a passage to something far more dangerous. Chapter 6. The Unseen Price. The air around them thickened with a palpable sense of dread. Elias felt his heart racing as the figure stepped further through the rift, its form coalescing from the swirling energy. It was tall, towering over them, its shape humanoid but distorted, its limbs too long, its silhouette fractured in ways that defied reason. The darkness radiating from it seemed to twist the very air, warping the light around it, bending reality itself. The ground beneath their feet trembled as if the earth itself was trying to reject the intrusion. Elias's breath hitched. This was no mere apparition. This was something alive, something that had crossed from another reality, another time. Run? Kara shouted again, her voice shrill with panic. Elias didn't hesitate. Move, he barked, grabbing Dr. Vance by the arm and yanking her back. The crew scrambled, turning to flee into the jungle, but the air felt too heavy, too thick. It was like they were wading through molasses, every movement slow and cumbersome, as if the rift itself was pulling them back toward the figure. The thing didn't move quickly. It didn't need to. Its presence alone was enough to freeze them in their tracks. Elias's legs felt like lead as he turned back to face the rift, his eyes locked on the figure as it emerged fully from the tear in spacetime. It was watching them. Its movements were disjointed, like it wasn't entirely part of this world. Its form flickered and shimmered, the shadows it cast almost alive. Elias could feel its gaze, even though its face was obscured by darkness. There was an overwhelming sense of inevitability in its presence, as though it had always been there, waiting for this moment. Dr. Vance pulled herself free from his grip, her face pale but determined. "We can't outrun it," she muttered under her breath, glancing toward the others who were frozen with fear. "We have to close the rift. We have to contain it." Elias's eyes shot to the ring, the source of the rift. The symbols on it were glowing brighter now, pulsing in time with the energy radiating from the figure. There was no time left. If they didn't act now, the rift would consume them all. "Get to the ring," Elias shouted. "We'll try to reverse the energy, maybe shut it down." Kara and the others nodded, and they moved toward the stone structure, but the air grew heavier with every step they took. The figure remained motionless, its form shifting unervingly, as though it were becoming aware of them, of their intentions. "Don't let it get close," Elias shouted as they reached the ring. The energy around them intensified, a low hum vibrating through their bones. It was like the very fabric of space was starting to come undone. Elias stepped up to the ring, his hands trembling as he tried to read the symbols, trying to make sense of the alien script. His mind raced, fighting to recall any knowledge he had about energy flows, any theories he could remember about quantum anomalies. But nothing came to him. Nothing prepared him for this. Dr. Vance joined him, her fingers flying over her scanner as she muttered under her breath. "The symbols, they're instructions, a sequence. If I can just..." Before she could finish, a sudden blast of energy shot from the rift, slamming into the ground just feet from them. The shockwave sent them both sprawling backward, the force rattling their bones. The thing emerged from the rift fully now, its presence suffocating. The air was thick with its power. Elias's mind screamed at him to run, to get away from it, but he couldn't. They had to finish this. They had to stop it before it spread beyond this jungle, before it destroyed everything. "We're running out of time," Kara yelled from behind them. "Whatever it is, it's getting stronger." Dr. Vance scrambled to her feet, her eyes wide with terror. "The symbols are a lock. A key to bind the rift, but the energy, it's growing too fast." She turned to Elias, her voice shaking. "We need to act now or it will be too late." Elias looked around, trying to find any way to counteract the growing power of the rift. He could feel the presence of the figure, its gaze, on him like it was waiting for him to make a move. But what choice did they have? With a deep breath, Elias stepped forward, placing his palm against the stone. The air around him seemed to ripple in response, the symbols glowing brighter, swirling into a chaotic, almost violent pattern. The rift pulsed, responding to his touch. "We need to synchronize it with the energy from the rift," Dr. Vance said urgently, trying to make sense of the scanner's readings. "Elias, you need to align the symbols precisely with the rift's energy frequency." He nodded, heart pounding in his chest, sweat beading on his forehead. The vibrations from the rift were almost unbearable, and the presence of the creature loomed like an invisible weight pushing down on them. Every second felt like an eternity. The figure moved again, its limbs stretching unnaturally, casting a long shadow. It was closing in. They had no more time. "Hold on," Elias shouted, pressing his hand harder against the stone. The hum of the rift grew louder, and with it, an intense burst of energy shot through the clearing, flooding the area with a blinding light. A wave of energy surged out from the stone, crashing into the figure with a force that made the ground tremble beneath them. The air around them seemed to crackle, as though reality itself was stretching and threatening to tear apart. The thing recoiled, its form flickering violently as though it couldn't exist in the same space anymore. Come on," Elias muttered, his teeth clenched, eyes squeezed shut against the blinding light. The rift began to close, its swirling energy slowing, retreating back into the stone ring. But as the rift collapsed, the creature let out an ear-splitting screech, a sound that reverberated deep in Elias's bones. Its form twisted violently, struggling against the pull of the rift's closing. With one last burst of energy, the rift snapped shut, the ring symbols dimming to nothing. And then, silence. Elias staggered backward, his legs weak with exhaustion. He barely caught himself against the edge of the stone ring, breathing heavily, the weight of what they had just faced bearing down on him. The jungle was still. The air no longer hummed with unnatural energy. They were alive. But something had changed. They had sealed the rift, contained the entity, at least for now, but the cost was not yet clear. Elias turned to look at his crew. Kara's face was pale, her eyes wide with shock. Dr. Vance stood frozen, staring at the spot where the rift had been, her hand trembling. "It's over," Elias whispered, more to himself than anyone else. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. That whatever they had just witnessed wasn't gone, it was waiting. The price of knowledge was never just a momentary cost. It lingered like a shadow, always there, waiting to emerge again. And as Elias looked at the empty clearing, he realized that their mission, whatever it had truly been, had only just begun. The rift had been sealed. But the knowledge it had given them, it would never leave. And something far darker was still out there, watching.